She married a poor man to repay a debt, but he was a secret CEO who had always loved her. Have you ever married someone not out of love, but out of duty? Lin Xiaoyu did. To repay a debt that couldn't be measured in money, she said, "I do," to a man she barely knew, a delivery worker with nothing to offer but a quiet smile and a warm heart. Or so she thought. But behind that humble smile was a secret, a billion-dollar secret. A man who had loved her from the shadows. A storm of lies, obsession, betrayal, and sacrifice was waiting to explode, and it all began with a favor and a flash marriage. No one expected Lin Xiaoyu to make such a decision so soon after her father's funeral. The mourning ribbons hadn't even faded when she walked into the civil affairs office, hand in hand with Zhou Weichen, a delivery man with calloused palms and a gaze too deep for his modest background. It wasn't love, not at first. It was duty. A marriage of obligation, sealed not by affection, but by a promise whispered by a dying man. Zhou Weichen had saved her father's life during a warehouse accident 6 months prior. Her father, grateful and riddled with guilt, made Weichen swear to take care of Xiaoyu. And Xiaoyu, unable to say no to her father's final wish, agreed to marry a man she barely knew. Friends called it foolish. Relatives called it shameful. A flash marriage with a poor guy? It sounded like madness. But Xiaoyu wasn't looking for approval. She was drowning in grief, clutching onto the last string her father left behind. Even if it meant stepping into a life far removed from her world of silk blouses and quiet bookstores. Weichen lived in a small apartment above a grocery shop, where the walls were thin and dreams had no space to echo. Yet somehow it felt safer than the mansion she grew up in. From the start, there was a strange calm in their home. Weichen didn't speak much. He cooked quietly, folded the laundry without being asked, and left the bigger room for her. It wasn't romantic, but it was gentle. Xiaoyu found herself wondering why a man so capable chose such a quiet, humble life. The secrecy around his past lingered like steam on a bathroom mirror, visible but untouchable. Sometimes she'd catch him staring at her when he thought she wasn't looking. Not with lust or curiosity, but something softer, familiar. And there was a tenderness in how he treated her, like someone guarding a fragile memory. At night, she often lay awake, wondering if he had once loved someone else, someone who left him broken enough to accept a loveless marriage. But was it truly loveless? Something about the way Weichen said good morning made her heart twitch. The way he remembered how she liked her tea, strong and slightly sweet. He never asked about her past or demanded affection. Instead, he simply made space for her in his life, and in silence that space began to grow roots. Still, there were moments that disturbed her. Mysterious phone calls he'd answer in the hallway, locked drawers in his study, times he'd disappear for hours without explanation. The man she married might have been a delivery driver, but there was more to him. Something hidden beneath the surface, like a submerged city in a still lake. His identity remained a quiet enigma. People whispered. A girl from the market once asked why a woman like Xiaoyu would marry someone like him. The class differences were glaring. She, polished and reserved. He, rugged and nameless. But Xiaoyu, stubborn as always, shrugged it off. Public humiliation was just noise. Her loyalty to her father's dying wish mattered more than strangers' opinions. But even her loyalty had limits. One night, she overheard Weichen on the phone, speaking in a voice not his own, firm, commanding, calculating. The mask of the poor man slipped just for a moment. It left her shaken. Who was this man she married? Why did it feel like everything she knew was just a carefully constructed illusion? That night, she stood by the window, the cold seeping through the glass, and wondered if she had walked into something far more complicated than she imagined. A marriage that began with repaying a favor was now layered with secrecy, unspoken emotions, and questions she feared to ask. Curiosity clawed at her resolve, and the walls between them felt closer than ever. She wanted to ask him, to confront the strange calm in his eyes, the way he never flinched under pressure, but something held her back. Maybe it was fear or pride, or maybe, deep down, she wasn't ready to hear a painful truth that could destroy the fragile peace they had built. She told herself it didn't matter, that she was only here because of her father. But in the silence of that room, with her hand resting on the photo of her father smiling beside Joe Weitchen, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't sure if she was still living her father's story, or if somehow she had already started living her own. Joe Weitchen woke before dawn, as he always did. By the time Xiao Yu opened her eyes, the scent of rice porridge and sesame oil already drifted from the kitchen. He greeted her with a soft smile and slipped out the door, claiming he had deliveries to make. She believed him because he never gave her a reason not to. But in truth, his route never existed, and the van he drove wasn't for groceries, it was for secrets. Weitchen had built Hengyuan Biotech from the ground up, funding it under layers of shell companies and trusted proxies. He wasn't just a delivery man. He was the architect of one of the most advanced gene therapy labs in the country. Every day, he changed from cotton shirts to crisp suits behind tinted glass, becoming the CEO no one knew existed. His hidden identity was more than a disguise. It was a shield. Why? Because love had betrayed him once. Not the dramatic kind, but the slow, eroding kind. Years ago, a different woman had exposed his vulnerability, traded his loyalty for status, and nearly cost him his empire. That emotional betrayal cut deeper than any business deal gone wrong. Since then, secrecy became his religion. He vowed never to let anyone in again, until Xiao Yu. She reminded him of the life he could have had if things had been different. Her kindness wasn't forced. Her grief wasn't manipulative. She didn't ask questions. She didn't demand answers. And that made her dangerous, because in her silence Weitchen found peace. And in that peace he started to feel again. Feelings he tried to bury. At Hengyuan, his team only knew him as Mr. Zhu, a man who rarely showed his face, but whose decisions shaped the future of genetic therapy. The lab had just begun trials on a treatment that could revolutionize hemophilia care, an innovation driven not by market demand, but by something far more personal, a future he feared Xiao Yu might desperately need. Still, he told himself the truth could wait. There was no need to shatter the illusion she lived in. After all, what harm could come from a little secrecy if it meant protecting the only person who had ever looked at him without expectation? But fate doesn't tolerate borrowed time. One morning, Xiao Yu visited him unannounced at a location she thought was just a warehouse. What she found instead was a pristine, high-security building with frosted glass doors, biometric scanners, and a polished receptionist who blinked twice at her name. "Mr. Zhou doesn't take walk-ins," she said. Xiao Yu left without pressing further, but a splinter of doubt lodged in her chest. The contrast between the man who washed dishes at home and the aura of that building, it was too great to ignore. She tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe she was overthinking, but the image stayed. That night, Weitchen returned as if nothing happened. He asked about her day, stirred soup at the stove, and mentioned a fake delay in a shipment. Xiao Yu nodded along, watching him closely. There was no crack in his performance, and that terrified her more than any confirmation. It meant he had done this before, hidden before, lied before. Later, she found a document slipped beneath their sofa, a memo stamped with the Hengyuan logo. Her hands trembled as she read it. It was filled with medical jargon, gene markers, and trial numbers. But one phrase caught her eye. Hemophilia variant A. Stage 2. Subject trials. It meant nothing to her. Not yet. But something inside her whispered that it would, very soon. Vaiken noticed her growing silence, but said nothing. In truth, he was battling his own storm. The love triangle forming in his heart wasn't between two women, but between truth and protection. Between the man he once was, and the man he became for her. Which part would she love if she ever knew? In the darkness of their bedroom, as Xiao Yu pretended to sleep, Vaiken sat on the floor, head against the wall, holding the same wedding photo she once thought meaningless. He stared at it and whispered what he could never say out loud. If one day you find out who I really am, please don't walk away. Fang Qianru arrived back in the country like a storm nobody expected, but one that had been brewing for years. Elegant, composed, and deadly behind the smile, she stepped out of the black car wearing heels that had crushed hearts in 3 continents. To the world, she was the daughter of media mogul Fang Jiancheng. To Weichen, she was the emotional betrayal he had tried to forget. She hadn't returned for nostalgia. She came for possession. Qianru never lost anything without a fight, and Zhou Weichen was a prize she refused to let go. When she learned of his secret flash marriage to Lin Xiaoyu, her pride shattered. The man who once clung to her shadow had given his loyalty to a nobody. It wasn't love. It was war. She made her move with precision. First, a business acquisition attempt, quietly threatening Hung Yuan's investors. Then social manipulation. Rumors surfaced overnight about Weichen's marriage being a sham, a marriage of obligation. A poor guy clinging to a girl with no value. The press loved it, and Zhao Yu began to feel it. At the supermarket, whispers chased her. Women who once smiled now turned their backs. A delivery man's wife? A girl with no pedigree? She endured it, but Weichen noticed. His fists clenched each time he saw the pain in her eyes. But instead of telling the truth, he tightened the mask. It wasn't time yet. Qianru didn't stop there. She tracked Zhao Yu, showed up by coincidence in places Zhao Yu frequented. Once at the doctor's office, once outside a small bookstore. Always alone, always poised. But the look in her eyes was anything but friendly. It was possession wrapped in pearls. Then came the invitation, a private gala hosted by the Fang family. Weichen received it untouched by sentiment. He knew what it meant. A power move. Qianru's message was clear. Step into my world, or I'll burn yours. He declined, politely. But Qianru wasn't polite anymore. She was obsessed. One evening, Xiao Yu returned home with eyes red and voice low. Do you know a woman named Fang Qianru? Weichen froze. His silence said more than words. She told me she was your fiancée, that your marriage to me was just paying a debt. Xiao Yu wasn't crying. She was staring, searching, and Weichen had no answer that wouldn't hurt her. A love triangle had formed, one of silence, suspicion, and a scheming rival who knew how to dig at old wounds. Qianru sent Xiao Yu photos of her and Weichen taken years ago. Private, intimate moments, paired with messages like, he said the same words to me once. It wasn't just manipulation, it was calculated humiliation. Despite the turmoil, Xiao Yu held her ground, but cracks began to show. The once gentle space between them filled with cold pauses and half-truths. At night, she'd lie awake while Weichen stared at the ceiling, both pretending to sleep. Their connection wasn't broken, but it was bending under the weight of secrets. Qianru escalated again. This time, she contacted Xiao Yu directly. She offered money, freedom. You don't belong in his world, she whispered. You're just a placeholder until he gets tired of pretending. Let go before you're the one left behind. Xiao Yu didn't respond, but her silence haunted Weichen more than any scream could. One afternoon, Qianru cornered him in a parking garage. her voice sweet like venom. "I know you still care about me, Weichin. She's not your equal. She's your pity project. Come back before I ruin you both." He walked away, but that wasn't the end. Qianru wasn't just an ex, she was a storm, and her obsession had just begun to tear the sky open. Lin Xiaoyu stood frozen in the examination room, clutching the corner of the paper-covered bed as the doctor cleared his throat gently. "You're pregnant," he said, but his voice carried something else: concern, hesitation, warning. Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure whether to cry, laugh, or scream. This wasn't part of the plan. She walked home in silence, one hand protectively resting over her stomach. The streets blurred around her. A child, in this fragile marriage built on loyalty and unspoken emotions, and with a man whose life was still a mystery. She needed answers. But when Weichin opened the door with his usual warmth, her voice betrayed her. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. His eyes widened, not with panic, but something deeper. He said all the right things. "I'll take care of you. We'll do this together." But later that night, she caught him pacing alone, fists clenched at his sides. That's when the guilt started growing inside him like wildfire. Not because of the baby, but because of what she didn't know. About herself, about her body, about the silent danger already inside her blood. Weichin pulled out her old medical records, the ones she never bothered to check after her father died. He had secretly ordered a full panel weeks ago, after noticing how easily she bruised, how long small cuts took to heal. And there it was. Hemophilia. A life-threatening condition passed down silently, now awakened by pregnancy. The diagnosis hit him like a punch to the gut. Hemophilia in women was rare, but Xiaoyu's version was severe. Her high-risk pregnancy could become fatal if complications arose. The very life growing inside her could be the reason hers ended. And the worst part? She didn't know. She still smiled softly in the kitchen, still made tea, still folded clothes, completely unaware that her body was a ticking clock. Weichin spiraled. He contacted Hengyuan's chief scientists in secret. He demanded results on their latest genetic therapy trials, treatments still under research, still considered dangerous. But he was desperate. This wasn't about science anymore. This was personal. The woman he married out of obligation had become someone he couldn't imagine losing. He became more attentive, insisted on driving her to appointments, cooked iron-rich meals, monitored every cough, every wince, but he still hadn't told her. The secrecy was killing him, but the truth might kill her spirit. She believed she was healthy. She believed this baby was a blessing, and he didn't want to shatter that light with fear. Xiaoyu, for her part, noticed the shift. He held her a little longer each morning, watched her sleep, cried quietly once when he thought she was out of earshot. She assumed it was about the stress of impending fatherhood. She didn't realize it was something darker, a fear of her blood, a fear of her death. Then came the spotting, faint but unmistakable. At the emergency room, Weichin sat in silence as the doctor reviewed her chart. "Your wife needs genetic monitoring," he said, not knowing Weichin was the one funding the very tech he recommended. Xiaoyu lay in the hospital bed, unaware that her file had already been flagged at 3 national labs. Later that night, Weichin kissed her forehead and whispered promises he couldn't yet keep. "I won't let anything happen to you." But inside, he knew he was standing at the edge of something terrifying. The only path forward was a secret medical treatment, one that hadn't yet passed safety approval, one that might save her or break everything. He stared at the file marked Gene Intervention, Stage 2. His own wife was becoming the very case study he swore never to personalize. And yet this wasn't just about research anymore. It was about sacrifice, love, redemption. and a desperate man willing to risk everything for the woman who still believed he was just a delivery man with warm hands and a gentle heart. As Xiaoyu slept beside him, unaware of the war her body was already fighting, Weichen made his decision. The clinical trials would go forward, no matter the risk, because some things, some lives, were worth everything, even if it meant carrying the weight of the secret alone, for now. It happened just after sunset. Lin Xiaoyu had gone to the pharmacy alone, something she rarely did anymore. The streets were quiet, her phone battery nearly dead. She didn't notice the black car trailing her until it was too late. A hand grabbed her from behind, a sharp scent of perfume, a familiar voice whispering, "Don't scream," and then silence. When Xiaoyu opened her eyes, she was in a dimly lit room, curtains drawn, a single chair facing hers. And there she was, Fang Qianru, dressed in designer silk, sipping tea like this was a casual visit. "You should be careful," she said calmly. "Pregnancy can be unpredictable, especially for someone with your condition." Panic surged through Xiaoyu's chest. "How do you know?" she asked. Qianru smiled. "You think your husband could keep something like hemophilia hidden from me? Please, I know Zhou Weichen better than anyone." The manipulation was sharp, calculated. Qianru had crossed a line, and she wasn't done yet. Meanwhile, Weichen's phone rang again and again with no answer. He knew something was wrong. The fear gripping him was worse than anything he'd felt in business or battle. Xiaoyu was missing, and the only person who could be behind it was the woman who once said she'd rather burn his world than see him with someone else. Then came the call. Qianru's voice, calm and cruel. "I have your wife, and your child. But I'm not unreasonable. Marry me in 3 days, publicly. Make it real, or you'll never see her again." It wasn't just a threat. It was a power move, a brutal demand born from obsession, a final twist in a toxic love triangle. Weichen froze. The past and present collided. A forced marriage to the wrong woman, to protect the one he truly loved. It was a nightmare he had once escaped. Now, he was being dragged back in. But this time the stakes were higher. A life-threatening condition, a high-risk pregnancy, a life worth more than any company. He met with Qianru that night. Her eyes sparkled with madness. "You loved me once," she whispered. "Do it again, or lose her forever." Weichen clenched his jaw. "You don't know what love is." But he agreed. Not for Qianru, for Xiaoyu, for their unborn child, for the fragile hope still flickering inside her. Xiaoyu, sedated and confused, awoke to see Weichen's name trending online, announcing an engagement to Fang Qianru. Her heart shattered. Was this all a lie? A fake marriage now replaced by a real one? The public humiliation burned. She tried to escape, but the guards stopped her. Qianru watched from the doorway, victorious. In secret, Weichen sent a message to Dr. Meng Zeu. "Track her, help her, I'll find a way out." It was a desperate cry for backup. Zeu, protective and furious, mobilized immediately. He didn't trust Weichen, but he trusted Xiaoyu. The rivalry between them had to wait. Now was about survival, about rescue. Weichen signed the engagement papers, sat beside Qianru at the press conference, cameras flashing, reporters buzzing, but his eyes scanned every room, looking for a sign, anything that would lead him to Xiaoyu. Qianru leaned in and whispered, "You see, the world still belongs to me." But Weichen wasn't listening. He was plotting. He followed clues left behind, tiny fragments of scent, timing and digital traces, each one a breadcrumb toward the woman he loved. And in the final hour, just before the wedding rehearsal, he found it, the address, an old villa tucked away in the hills. He sped through the night, praying he wasn't too late, because if he didn't reach her in time, it wouldn't just be a miscarriage. It would be the end of everything he had built, everything he had hidden, and everything he was finally willing to risk for a single truth. Sacrificial love was no longer a choice. It was his only way out. The Liu family estate was a fortress of tradition, red lanterns hanging like watchful eyes, marble floors echoing centuries of pride. It was here that Lin Xiaoyu, still pale from captivity, was brought by Weichen to be formally introduced as his wife. A gesture of defiance, yes, but also a plea for acceptance, for peace, for a new beginning. She wore a soft blue dress, modest and elegant, her hair pinned with trembling hands. The air was thick with judgment before she even stepped inside. The elders sat around the grand dining hall like a jury already convinced of her guilt. Whispers flew like daggers. "That's the girl? She looks too plain. Not even from a respectable family." Weichen stood tall beside her, his grip firm. "This is Lin Xiaoyu," he said, "my wife." But tradition had its own rules, and Xiaoyu had broken them all. No pedigree, no dowry, no blood ties. A poor girl married into wealth? Unthinkable. To them, she was a social stain, an unwelcome symbol of rebellion. Then came Aunt May, the overprotective matriarch whose word carried more weight than law. She took one look at Xiaoyu and turned to Weichen with a cold smile. "You disappoint us. First, a fake divorce. Now this. She has no place in this family." The room held its breath. Xiaoyu bowed slightly, but her cheeks burned. A servant tripped, spilling wine on the floor. Silence followed. Aunt May's voice sliced through it. Perhaps she should be cleaning this, since she's more familiar with supermarkets than society. The insult landed hard. Weichen's jaw tightened, but Xiaoyu, she merely knelt with dignity and wiped the mess, refusing to let shame break her. Later, during dinner, the real attack came. Aunt May pulled out a painting, supposedly ruined by Xiaoyu weeks ago. "This was your uncle's final gift to me," she said, voice trembling, "and she destroyed it." Xiaoyu stood in disbelief. "I didn't." But May interrupted, eyes sharp. "Then prove it, apologize in front of everyone." Weichen stood, voice low and furious. "Enough. If you want someone to blame, blame me." But Aunt May was relentless. "A woman with no respect for family traditions has no place here." The public humiliation was complete. Even the younger cousins looked away. Xiaoyu's presence was reduced to a cautionary tale. Despite everything, Xiaoyu didn't cry. Her heartbreak was quiet. She stood, bowed deeply, and whispered, "I'm sorry for the pain I caused, but I will not apologize for existing." The room gasped. Weichen looked at her with awe. In that moment, she wasn't the victim. She was the storm. Later, in the hallway, she turned to Weichen and asked softly, "Is this what I have to endure for loving you?" He had no answer. The contrast between rich and poor, tradition and modern love, felt like a chasm. And Xiaoyu stood at the edge, wondering if she was strong enough to keep crossing it. The next morning, the tabloids had it all. Photos, headlines, shame. CEO's wife humiliated by Liu matriarch. The story went viral. Class differences weren't just private anymore, they were trending. Weichen wanted to sue, to fight, to fix it. But Xiaoyu stopped him. "Let them talk," she said. "Let them see who we are." What they didn't know was that humiliation had changed something in her. She wasn't just a placeholder wife anymore. She had endured rejection, betrayal, and now public exposure. And yet she was still standing, still carrying a child, still loving a man who had placed her in the center of a storm. But storms, after all, only made her stronger. Joe Weichen stared at the signed papers on his desk, the ink barely dry. The divorce was real now, at least on paper. It sat in a sealed envelope, hidden inside a drawer he opened every night but never touched. Lin Xiaoyu didn't know. She thought they were still married, still bound by promises made in shadows, but Vaishan had already started to let go, quietly, painfully. He had filed them after the public humiliation, after seeing the bruises on her heart that no one else seemed to notice. To the world it might look like cowardice, but to him it was sacrifice. If leaving was the only way to protect her from his world, from his enemies, from the weight of tradition, then he'd disappear with dignity, even if it broke him. He told himself she deserved a simpler life, one without fake engagements, genetic trials, ruthless families, or hidden medical records, a life where she could carry a child without fearing her own body, a life with someone who didn't keep secrets behind locked doors, and yet every night he couldn't stop looking at her. Xiaoyu noticed the shift. He was still there, present, polite, warm, but something in his gaze had changed. He held her like she was slipping away. His kisses were gentler, his silences longer. One evening she asked him, "Is there something you're not telling me?" He smiled, shook his head and said, "Nothing that would change how I feel." But that was the lie, wasn't it? Everything was changing. The walls between them, once invisible, were now solid. She could feel it in the way he lingered at the door before leaving, in the way he whispered, "Take care," like it was a goodbye. And still she held on, because she didn't know how much he had already let go. Vaishan began transferring assets to her name in secret: the apartment, the business shares he once hid, the insurance policy marked under her ID. If anything happened, she would be secure. He instructed his lawyers to protect her at all costs. The man who once built empires in silence now dismantled his life for love. The pain of it all ate at him. He watched her sleep beside him, dreaming of a family, while he buried that dream with every breath. Sometimes he stood outside her door, fists clenched, whispering apologies she'd never hear. "I'm sorry for choosing this. I'm sorry you don't get to decide." Meanwhile, Xiaoyu, sensing his distance, grew desperate for connection. She cooked his favorite meals, played his favorite music. She even placed their wedding photo on the hallway table, scented, visible, as if to remind him of who they were. But Vaishan, consumed by guilt, walked past it like it was a relic from another life. Then came the call from the hospital. Her hemophilia markers were fluctuating. The pregnancy was entering a critical stage. She needed rest, stability, peace, everything he was failing to provide. The doctor looked him in the eye and said, "If she's under emotional distress, she could lose everything." And so he made his final choice. That night, he kissed her on the forehead and whispered, "If one day you find out everything, I hope you'll understand." She smiled sleepily, unaware of the envelope now resting beneath the floorboard. The divorce was done. But the love, it still burned, quiet, unwavering, alive only in the spaces between their words. Somewhere deep down, Xiaoyu knew something was slipping, but she didn't yet realize that the man still sharing her bed had already set her free. And what neither of them knew was that love, even in silence, was about to speak louder than ever before. Dr. Meng Zheyu arrived quietly, carrying a small box of prenatal vitamins and the kind of tenderness only a childhood friend could offer. He had been away for years, building his career, moving from hospital to hospital, but when he heard about Xiaoyu's pregnancy and her health risks, he returned without hesitation. "You don't have to go through this alone," he told her. At first, Xiaoyu didn't question his timing. She welcomed his presence, grateful for a familiar face amid the chaos. Zheyu had always been her safe place, kind, attentive, and fiercely loyal. He listened when she needed to cry. He stayed when Vaishan couldn't, and in her most vulnerable moments, he reminded her who she used to be before everything became so complicated. But Vaishan noticed. From the way Zheyu lingered after checkups to the subtle looks he gave Xiaoyu when she wasn't watching. He didn't confront it, not yet. His role as a divorced man required restraint, but inside, something churned. Not because of rivalry, but because he knew Zeu didn't carry secrets. Zeu could give her the life Vaishan was slowly erasing. The love triangle that had once involved Qianru now shifted. This time, the threat wasn't malicious. It was noble, gentle, sincere, and somehow that made it worse. Zeu brought Xiaoyu to appointments, cooked her nutritious meals, left handwritten notes by her bedside like small tokens of affection. He never said the words, but they echoed in every gesture. "I'd never leave you." One afternoon, Zeu helped Xiaoyu change her bandages and noticed new bruises forming too easily. He looked at her carefully and asked, "Are you sure you're being looked after properly?" Xiaoyu smiled, brushing it off. "Vaichan does what he can." But her voice lacked the certainty it once had, and Zeu felt it. An opening. Vaichan watched them from a distance. He told himself it was fine, that Xiaoyu deserved someone whole, someone safe. But watching Zeu with her, touching her gently, caring for her without guilt, it broke something inside him. Not jealousy exactly. Something deeper. The painful truth that love in silence had a cost. One evening, Vaishan returned late to find Zeu in the kitchen, chopping vegetables like he belonged there. "She's resting," Zeu said casually. "Her blood pressure spiked this morning. Stress is dangerous at this stage." Vaishan nodded, swallowing the bitterness. "Thanks for being here," he muttered. But Zeu's eyes held a question. "Why aren't you?" Later that night, Vaichan found Xiaoyu asleep on the couch, a warm blanket draped over her by someone else's hand. He sat beside her and whispered, "I'm still here, even if you can't see me anymore." His fingers brushed her cheek, and for a moment he imagined a life where he hadn't let fear lead him into silence. Zeu, for all his kindness, wasn't blind. He sensed the tension, the fake divorce, the lies swimming under the surface. One night he confronted Vaichan quietly. "If you still love her, fight for her. Don't let her drift away just because you're afraid." Vaichan said nothing, because the answer was complicated, because love, when buried beneath secrets, becomes its own prison. Xiaoyu, torn between comfort and confusion, began to feel the pull. Zeu offered clarity. Vaichan offered depth. One man stood beside her, the other behind her shadows. And all the while, her heart whispered questions she was too afraid to ask. Who still loved her? Who had already let go? The tension in the air thickened. Every word, every look between the three of them became part of an unspoken equation. And Xiaoyu, now visibly pregnant, stood at the center, craving safety, honesty, and belonging. But what none of them realized was that fate had its own plans, and soon the illusion of peace would shatter completely. The rain poured like judgment the night Xiaoyu disappeared. It was supposed to be a routine checkup. Zeu had dropped her off, promising to return in an hour, but when he came back, the clinic receptionist looked confused. "She never checked in," she said. Panic spread through his chest like wildfire. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Fang Qianru had waited patiently for this moment. Her last attempt to win Vaichan had failed, but she wasn't finished. Obsession had become her oxygen. She wanted revenge, control, and erasure. Xiaoyu was never supposed to last this long. Now, pregnant and adored, she was everything Qianru could no longer be. Xiaoyu woke up in a sterile, windowless room. Cold light, surgical tools, a woman in scrubs, and Qianru, dressed like a queen visiting a slaughterhouse, standing with arms crossed. "Relax," she said sweetly. "You won't remember much, but you'll thank me later. This child will only ruin your life, and his." Fear clutched Xiaoyu's body. She struggled to move, strapped to the gurney, her voice hoarse from crying. "Don't do this, please." But Qianru wasn't listening. The plan was already in motion. This wasn't just about jealousy, it was about power. Public humiliation hadn't broken Xiaoyu, but losing this child would. Meanwhile, Vaichan had mobilized every connection he had left. Surveillance footage, traffic cameras, GPS signals, nothing was off limits. He didn't care about exposure anymore. The only thing that mattered was finding her. And fast, because hemophilia and forced trauma could mean immediate death. It wasn't just a miscarriage they feared. It was a funeral. Zhou traced a signal from Xiaoyu's medical bracelet, something he had insisted she wear for emergencies. The tracker led them to an abandoned clinic outside the city, where rumors of illegal procedures had once surfaced. Weishan arrived first, storming through the rusted doors like a man possessed. Every hallway screamed urgency. Inside, Xiaoyu had managed to loosen one strap, enough to scratch the nurse's arm and scream. Qianru snapped. "Do it now!" she shouted, but before the injection reached her skin, the door burst open. Weishan tackled the nurse. Zhou ran to Xiaoyu, shielding her with his body. The chaos was deafening. Qianru stood frozen as Weishan turned to her, eyes blazing. "You'll never touch her again," she laughed bitterly. "You still love her, even now." Weishan didn't answer. He didn't need to. His body said everything. Sacrificial love didn't need explanation. It needed action, and this was his final act of defiance. Xiaoyu was rushed to the hospital. She slipped in and out of consciousness. Monitors beeped like anxious hearts. Zhou barked orders. Weishan paced like a ghost in a body. Hours passed. Then, finally, the doctor emerged. "She's stable. But—" His voice dropped. "We lost the baby." Silence. The kind that crushes lungs. Xiaoyu awoke hours later, eyes swollen, stomach empty, heart shattered. Weishan sat beside her, holding her hand, unable to speak. She looked at him and whispered, "Was it a girl?" He nodded slowly, and then she turned away, curling into herself, as if trying to fold back time. The heartbreak rippled through everyone. The loss of the child wasn't just physical, it was symbolic, of silence, of secrecy, of all the chances they had to protect her, and failed. For Weishan, it was a turning point. A final confession was no longer optional. It was the only way forward. But before he could speak, Xiaoyu did. "If you knew," she whispered, "why didn't you tell me?" And with those words, the weight of hidden identity, secret protection, and painful truth came crashing down. Love had survived many things, but the silence, that might be the one thing she couldn't forgive. The hospital room was silent, save for the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the soft hum of the nightlights. Lin Xiaoyu stared at the ceiling, her body numb, her soul suspended somewhere between heartbreak and disbelief. The miscarriage had left her hollow, not just physically, but spiritually, like the world had stolen something it could never give back. Weishan sat in the corner, silent. He hadn't left her side in days, yet he hadn't said the words she longed to hear. Not, "I'm sorry," not "I love you," not even, "It's going to be okay." And maybe he knew, none of those words would be enough anymore. She had bled for a love wrapped in secrecy. And now, all that was left was silence. Then came the moment he couldn't delay any longer. One evening, as rain drummed against the window pane, Weishan knelt beside her bed. He placed a folder in her lap. Inside, the divorce papers, the hidden records, the truth about his identity, the genetic therapy, all of it. "No more lies," he whispered. "You deserve to choose with your eyes open." Xiaoyu's hands trembled as she read. Every page was another wound reopening. Forced marriage, hidden identity, secret love, sacrificial silence. All of it was true. All of it was him. And yet, something in her heart didn't shatter. It softened, not because she forgave him, yet, but because she finally saw the pain he had carried too. Zhou visited the next day. He brought flowers and warm soup, and Xiaoyu smiled gratefully. But when he offered to take her home, she hesitated. "I need to talk to Weishan," she said quietly. "Alone." Zeu nodded. He understood. Some choices weren't his to make. Some battles weren't his to fight. In the courtyard behind the hospital, Xiao Yu found Weichen sitting alone under the awning. His eyes were red, his hands still. She sat beside him in silence, the space between them heavy with unspoken things. Finally she said, "You gave me freedom when I didn't ask for it. But now I'm choosing it because I want to stay." Weichen turned to her slowly, eyes wide. "Why?" he asked, broken. "After everything?" Xiao Yu's voice cracked, but she didn't look away. "Because you never stopped loving me, not even when I hated you, and that kind of love doesn't come twice in one lifetime." Her forgiveness wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, real. They returned home together, not as the same couple, but as something new, weaker in some ways, stronger in others. Weichen dismantled every wall he had ever built. No more secrets, no more protection by omission. Xiao Yu, in turn, allowed herself to trust again, slowly, with caution, but also with hope. They lit a candle for their lost child, gave her a name, spoke to her in soft voices under moonlight. It didn't fix what had been broken, but it honored it. And in doing so, it gave them permission to begin again, not as husband and wife by duty, but as partners by choice. Months passed. Xiao Yu's health improved. She smiled more. Weichen laughed again. Hengyuan Biotech's therapy advanced, this time with full transparency. And when Xiao Yu visited the lab one day and saw her name listed in the original case study, she didn't flinch. She just held his hand tighter. In the quiet of their rebuilt home, they began to dream again. Not recklessly, not naively, but bravely. And when Xiao Yu whispered, "I think I'm ready to try again," Weichen didn't cry. He just held her. Because sometimes after the heartbreak, after the betrayal, after the painful truth, what remains is the kind of love that survives fire, a love that no longer hides, a love that, even after all the darkness, dares to begin again. Some debts are paid with money, others with silence, sacrifice, and heartbreak. Lin Xiaoyu never imagined that behind a stranger's quiet eyes hid the man who had always protected her, even when it meant losing her. And Zhou Weichen, he learned the hard way that love without truth is just another form of pain. But somehow, through loss and betrayal, they found their way back, not to the beginning, but to something braver, stronger, real. And you, what would you have done in Xiaoyu's place? Could you forgive the man who broke your heart just to protect it? Do you think the ending was fair, or would you have walked away? Tell us in the comments. Your thoughts matter here. And if stories like this stir your heart, make you cry, reflect, and hope, hit subscribe. There's so much more waiting for you. Stories of love, pain, redemption, and the kind of endings you'll never forget.